If you are a PA, NP, or pharmacist and you think personal finance is too complicated for you to learn, that is exactly what they want you to think. The majority of the medical professionals we work with start out feeling like it is way too hard to learn this stuff. So they take one of two approaches. They bury their head in the sand and never address it, or they pay a financial advisor or other professional to do it for them. I'm going to show you how the decision to learn how to manage your money yourself can easily net you $1.5 million or more in this video. Now, I'm Kristen Burton, a critical care PA, and I went from $161,000 in student loan debt at graduation with no assets to a millionaire by 31 by learning how to invest in the stock bond market and real estate. I'm going to break down some of the ways that you can change your financial future by front-loading your financial knowledge in the same way that we talk about front-loading a financial portfolio. Here's the problem. You went through a lot of training and a lot of education to learn how to be a high-income clinician, right? Most people watching this video will earn at least 6 figures, which is incredible. However, along that way, you likely accrued some debt. For most of us, right? It's also 6 figures of student loan debt or more. And didn't learn a darn thing about money. Maybe you learned a little bit here and there from your parents or some program at your school like, hey, avoid credit card debt, or you should invest your money, whatever that means, but you don't really know how to do anything. So you ultimately feel trapped in this cycle of, I know I need to do better. I know there's more stuff out there to do, but I don't know how to learn it. And so again, you take one of the two approaches. You either bury your head in the sand and go, ugh, this is a problem. It's not an urgent problem, even though it's important, and I'll deal with it later, right? The perpetual later that never really seems to come to fruition. Or you go, I'm gonna go ahead and just offload this task to someone else, and I'm gonna pay a financial advisor or similar professional to do all this stuff for me. Well, here's the real and the tricky part of taking that approach. The issue with burying your head in the sand is pretty obvious. If you don't invest and you don't intentionally build assets that produce income, it won't happen by itself. And so you'll end up 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line, a very seasoned medical professional with decades of 6-figure earnings behind you and absolutely nothing to show for it. Okay, that one's obvious, right? We don't need any fancy calculations or numbers to explain what that looks like. The other one is not so obvious. And I'll tell you the story because I learned this the hard way. When I was a fresh graduate, I had felt like, okay, one of the things that successful people do is go out and get a financial advisor. And so that is exactly what I'm gonna do. So we did. And I used the gentleman who happened to be at Edward Jones, nothing against Edward Jones, but happened to be at Edward Jones to start a Roth IRA. And I felt like, okay, wow, I'm doing the things, right? All the stuff that you're supposed to do to build wealth, I'm doing it, I'm checking boxes, I'm successful. This is what should happen. The more I learned about personal finance, the more I realized, okay, I'm actually paying this person fees. Now, the classic structure for a financial advisor is what's called an assets under management fee. And so it's not like a fee when a lot of times, for example, you secure CPA services or student loan consultant services. You go and write them a check when you start, right? These fees are different, they're structured different, and so for a lot of us it feels like there isn't a fee. And it wasn't until I later learned the type of portfolio drag that occurs with an assets under management fee that I figured out, oh, I'm actually paying a lot of money for this. And the more I learned, the more I realized, holy cow, I can totally do this by myself for less than an hour a month. There's just no reason for me to pay this fee. And I ended up breaking up with my financial advisor in a kind, loving way because genuinely he meant well. He's a good human, but it was a service that I didn't need at that point in time. The value didn't exceed the cost, right? Anytime you're securing a service, the question is always, does the value exceed the cost? Now, there's always a point with that particular service where the value massively exceeds cost. And for a lot of medical professionals, that happens when you've really invested your way to a $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 portfolio. There's some complexity to your plan. You're maybe even 10 years away from financial independence and can say, hey, I need some help with distribution strategies. I'm not going to say financial advising services are never valuable. That would be a lie. But for a brand new graduate like I was, with less than a year of clinical practice, just trying to start a Roth IRA, I would have been 1,000 times better to go ahead and invest those funds on my own, spend some time learning how, and then to take the hour a month to manage it myself. When you do that, when you learn how to do it, and then you have some control over your money, it benefits you in a lot of ways. One of which I experienced myself. When I went to actually open a new Roth IRA, I ultimately chose Vanguard, and self-manage it, I exited Edward Jones, and when I did, I realized, oh my, a lot of the funds I'm invested in, they actually have really high fees themselves. They also have what are called front load fees, and I had some back load fees, meaning that for every single purchase I made, a percent was just taken out of the top immediately. And then when I went to go sell and leave and go to Vanguard where I would have access to very low cost funds to invest in, there was another fee on the back end. So I got hit with fees coming and going, and while the money was there, I was none the wiser. I had no idea. And it's because I didn't know what I didn't know, right? We say this all the time in medicine. You don't know what you don't know. And this was a beautiful example of me netting myself hundreds of thousands of dollars in the long term for spending a relatively short amount of time learning a new skill set. Now, I'm a money person, so I think everything in terms of return on investment. Like, for example, I'm not against offloading a skill to save yourself some time. And again, time is money, right? So there are certain things that I've elected to offload. For example, we have our house clean. I used to clean our house, but I realized, okay, I can actually go and earn more money per hour working rather than do the cleaning itself. It costs me less to offload that task, and then I'm able to have quality family time and actually net gain financially. For this particular skill set, the numbers didn't really work that way at all, right? It was like, okay, I can spend 20 hours learning and then 1 hour a month managing this portfolio and gain, I'll show you how, like 1.5 million bucks, or I can offload it. And it's like, okay, that math doesn't math, right? I don't earn more than that at my day job, picking up a shift or whatever. And so I realized, okay, this isn't really one of those tasks where it actually makes sense for me to offload it until I get to a genuine level of complexity where I need those expert eyes. And again, most new graduates, frankly, most people in their first 5 years of clinical practice are not there. You don't have the $500,000 portfolio. You haven't amassed the assets. And so the key is to actually employ every single dollar into your investment portfolio, minimize the fees, and get yourself to critical mass where you do have the wealth and you do warrant the conversation. Now, the other tricky thing is that, of course, not all financial advisors are made equal, right? I'm a PA, and so I can speak to PAs without offending anyone by saying I know some dang good PAs and I know some pretty horrible ones where I look at them like, ugh, I almost hate that we're in the same profession, right? Because you're doing such a poor job at your job. The same is true for financial advisors. There are a group of people who are absolutely outstanding, who can do, frankly, way more than just give you some pointers on index funds versus mutual funds, right? And what accounts to use. Like, there are people who are really good at analyzing deals for alternative asset class investments or projecting your future distribution. Like, there's really cool skills that a financial advisor can bring to the table, but not all financial advisors have those skills. Here's the other tricky part. A lot of them don't understand high dollar student loan debt and how that changes the game. I'll give you a great example. We recently worked with someone who had a long-standing relationship with a financial advisor of several years, who was a PA, married, with very high dollar student loan debt, pursuing public service loan forgiveness. And so the gentleman is the one who was a medical professional in the marriage, had the high dollar student loan debt, had the PSLF qualifying job. For years, the financial advisor had told this gentleman, do not invest in your workplace accounts. Don't use your 403B. Don't use your 457. Don't worry about your HSA. Open a Roth IRA with me and a taxable brokerage with me and invest there. I don't know, genuinely, if this situation happened because the financial advisor didn't know about how public service loan forgiveness works, or if it was self-serving advice. I'd like to think it's because they didn't know. But by intentionally skipping every opportunity to use investing to lower that person's adjusted gross income, they were actually keeping their student loan payment as high as it could possibly be. Layer that in with the fact that the way that the student loans were structured and the income was structured in that household, the couple should have been married filing separately. It was going to save them like $100,000 in their total cost of student loan payback to actually be married filing separately, which then made him ineligible to even use that Roth IRA he had opened. And so he was getting advice, right? He's doing what you're supposed to be doing, signing up for the professional service, like, hey, here I am, manage my money for me. And as a result, not only was he not maximizing his investments, but his student loan strategy was a disaster, absolute disaster. And they were actually losing a ton of money on a monthly basis just by paying way more in student loan payment that was necessary had they restructured things. So that's what we did. Restructured, ended up married filing separately, confirmed with the CPA, check, this is the move, this is the way to go. And then ultimately switched investing modalities to lower AGI and was able to create massive student loan savings while building wealth. This is the tricky part about having something that exists in isolation, like going to that financial advisor and just say, hey, how do I invest? Without having deep conversations with them about student loan strategy on the back end. Not all financial advisors even understand student loan strategy. So now you're in a position where it's like, well, shoot, do I need to pay a student loan consultant and a CPA and a financial advisor? As a brand new grad, that's pretty darn hard to do. It's more valuable for you to learn some of this stuff so that you can get yourself going in the right direction and actually feel like you understand what you should be doing. The other benefit outside of the objective saving of fees is that you're less likely to be okey-doked, so to speak, if you know some stuff, right? When you do get yourself to a position where you're doing really well financially, you have that really strong asset base, and you do go bring in some type of fiduciary of sorts, whatever you choose, to manage your investments, and you sit down at the table, by that point, you understand investing fundamentals, right? Because you've been doing it for a while, you've gotten yourself up to feeling like, I have this portfolio and I know some basics. And so when the conversation is led to, hey, what about this new investment? What about this? What about that? You can actually ask informed questions and you can arrive at a conclusion where not only do you go, yeah, that is a good idea, I agree with you, but also I understand why it's a good idea because I have some basic core fundamental knowledge. Now the conversation looks very different. And when someone says to you, hey, 27-year-old, brand new graduate with no dependents and no other assets, you need an IUL or a whole life policy, it's easy for you to avoid that conversation because you have a baseline knowledge of insurance and investing, but that's probably not a wise move for you in your specific financial circumstance. So it empowers you, right? It empowers you to make decisions. And when you do seek advice from others, it allows you to be a meaningful seat at the table and not just a passive recipient of ideas that you don't understand. Now, before I get into the numbers, I will say that the majority of people that we start working with say, this is too hard or overwhelming. That is like the number one verbiage used to describe money by medical professionals that we meet. Overwhelmed, anxiety provoking. Okay, here's a couple examples. This is Zully. She was a PA, said the exact same thing. Overwhelmed, right? This is another PA.
It was very daunting and I felt very overwhelmed.
Same exact thing, overwhelmed, anxious. The words that we use when we first face this sound a lot like the words that we used when we started learning medicine. Yes? Anyone else remember that? Like didactic, your first clinical rotation, the first time you got pimped in a patient's room, overwhelmed and anxious, yeah, are all the words that come to mind for that too. And now, if you're at least, a little clinically seasoned listening to this, you probably feel like, yeah, I'm getting this. Like, it's like, okay, I'm competent, I'm good or whatever. You didn't get there overnight, but you also didn't get there by burying your head in the sand and not learning anything. Now, most people, after they go through a program like ours, where they actually take a deep dive crash course into personal finance, learn as much as they can in 90 days, come out the other side saying the word empowered. That is the most common word we hear from people who have ended up saying, like, I spent 90 days all in learning personal finance, getting my systems in place. The back end of that, the words most commonly are transformed and empowered, right? This is Emily. She said that exact same thing. Financially empowered. Again, Emily was a PA. This is Johanna. She said the exact same thing. I didn't know where to start. No financial literacy. Didn't learn anything in school. Empowered was the word, right? And then Bridget actually used the word transformed. My whole life is transformed. It seems crazy. Like, how can your life be transformed? But think about it. Money seeps into every area of your life. Every personal area, money seeps in. Whether you're like, okay, I want to get married and I'm trying to combine finances with this person and we're trying to sort that out. I want to buy a house. Takes money, right? I want to move. Takes money. I really want to change jobs. I hate this job and I work way too much and I have way too much call. Well, that other job might be a pay cut. Money affects that, right? Money affects every layer of your life. Whether you can go on the next vacation to how many decades you're committed to working, all of those things are directly touched by money. And so when you develop this skill set and you say, hey, I'm now financially empowered, my life is transformed because I know this stuff, I feel confident in this arena, and that arena touches every other arena, you can see how it actually does trickle into all sorts of different avenues of life. So let's actually look at what is the objective metric to be had here if you learn the skill set. What is the ROI, right? Because that's what I care about. I'm a money person. What is the return on investment? And for me, if you know me in real life, I'm like one of the most intentional people when it comes to scheduling time. If I'm going to allocate my time to something, you better believe there's a return on the time spent. And so I want to know both of those layers. What financial gain am I going to get from saving in fees? What's the potential return on investment for my time spent? And then there'll be the subjective pieces that come at the end as well of how does my emotional life change? How do I feel differently stepping into a room knowing that my personal financial life is confidently controlled versus spiraling in the background? Here are some different ways that the fees you layer inside your investment portfolio will cost you not $100 or $1,000 or even $10,000, but hundreds of thousands into the millions. There's two key ways that your fee structure can do this. One is paying that assets under management fee that I mentioned, and the other is not being aware that your money is being invested in really high expense funds. There's a term called expense ratio. We don't need to get into it in this video, but it's the fund's internal operating expenses, and it dictates the fee drag on your returns. So here's an example of just funds with those high expense ratios. You might remember I said when I was at Edward Jones, I didn't realize my funds actually had really high expense ratios, and they had front load fees and back load fees, which I didn't even put in here. So if you had a $10,000 initial investment, you did $10,000 a year every year after that, you were going to have 8% returns before fees. You can see that having a fund with an expense ratio of 1% will actually lose you $200,000 compared to having a fund with an expense ratio of 0.09%. Now, Fidelity has a whole line of funds, index funds with a zero expense ratio, which means 0.09% would actually be high, and plenty of funds at Vanguard or Charles Schwab will even be lower than that. But this is an example of a single decision to use an expensive actively managed mutual fund versus a low-cost index fund or ETF, and the cost to you at the end, right? So you spent a few minutes of time, learned about how to minimize your investing fees, and you save yourself $200,000. Okay, there's not a lot of things where the return on that time investment is that high. Now, what happens if you pay an assets under management fee? Well, of course, it depends on what your level of assets under management is, right? But here's a great example. This could be one of two things. This could be a single medical professional who's like, I'm getting after it. I'm front loading portfolio. I'm going to retire early or hit even coast fire early. So they're investing $40,000 per year. Or this could easily be a dual income household with two earning partners that are investing a total of, again, $40,000 per year. You do this over a 35-year time horizon, meaning you start this when you're 30. You earn 8% average annual returns in the stock market. And then you layer in a 1% assets under management fee. The total cost is about $1.5 million, right? That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. $1.5 million. I can think of a lot better things to do with $1.5 million, like spoil my kids or grandkids, give to charity, travel more, etc., rather than losing that in fees. Now, while you may add in that assets under management fee later down the line, as your complexity builds, you have that 7-figure portfolio, you've done really well for yourself, you might pay some of this, but you wouldn't pay all of it, right? So again, there's not many skills where you can learn how to do something, automate most of it, keep your time output minimal, and net yourself over $1 million, right? Even medicine didn't do that for you, and you spent a lot more time and a lot more money learning how to do it. But what I see most often is it actually gets combined. And so this is an example. The background assumptions are actually investing a little bit less, only $20,000 per year starting at 30, rather than that 40,000 we saw in the last slide. And you can see that the comparison between left-hand column, you self-managing your portfolio of low-cost index funds and ETFs, very mindful of fees, compared to you paying a financial advisor, paying a 1% assets under management fee, and them selecting expensive actively managed mutual funds, which is what happened to me. The difference at the end is over $1 million. So again, yet another example of how this choice is not a $100 choice, not a $500 choice, it's a $1 million choice. And I have to point out, don't let people fool you, right? We have this sort of financial thought that you get what you pay for. And so if you buy a more expensive actively managed mutual fund, it's going to be better than a lower cost index fund or ETF. Like, oh, am I getting the cheaper version? Well, there's something really cool that comes out called the SPIVA report that actually compares the performance of these actively managed mutual funds compared to index funds over time to see, do they actually perform better? You're paying more, right? So it should actually perform so much better that it overcomes its fees and still does better than the index. And the data doesn't support it. When you increase the time horizon and say, okay, over 15 years, over 20 years, over 30 years, the vast majority, in this case, 70% of those actively managed funds actually underperform their indexes on an after fee, after tax basis. And so when you look at that, you go, wait a minute, you're telling me I can save money in fees, statistically do better in the long term, and do it all for probably an hour a month? Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. To say that my investing system even takes me an hour a month is a vast overstatement. The only way I can even justify close to an hour a month is if I'm including all the investing we do for kids as well. But for us in particular, almost everything is implemented, automated purchase orders, and it is all less than an hour a month. So again, huge return on the time spent to learn this stuff if you're willing to actually figure out some of this personal finance stuff for yourself. Now, if you're watching this and all of this sounds impossible or even too good to be true, watch my next video where I'm going to walk through case by case of medical professionals exactly like you, with student loan debt, with desires to buy a house, with kids, with all sorts of stuff going on. And you can see step by step how they actually created the big, beautiful financial future they were after. They learned this stuff, they dove in, and they created Coastfire, early financial independence, and plenty of them are on track to be multimillionaires in the process. So if you're wondering if it's actually possible for you, the case studies are what you need to see.